Hello everyone, my name is El Parnaso, and in today's video we're talking about one of my favorite topics. That's right, today we're talking about pod, because Yu-Gi-Oh! And pod has been related ever since the beginning of this game, in a lot more ways than just pod of greed. So today we're talking about pod of procrastination, a card coming soon at the middle of this year for the TCG. So, in order to understand this card and make a first approach of the heavy impact that these cards will do in the meta, we need to actually read the card first, right? So, let's see. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is this restriction that the card has and how it's going to change a lot of different interactions that we have. Because it says you cannot activate Pot of Procrastinations for the rest of this turn after this card resolves. This is a huge difference between this pod and all the other pods in the game, or at least all the meta relevant pods in the history of the game, besides Pod of Greed, right? Because for example, cards like Pot of Desires says almost the same thing, except the turn you can only activate one Pot of Desires. You or other pods are going to say you can only use this pod. Or most of them are going to say just the activate. And why is this so relevant when it comes to this card saying this card resolves? Because this means that this pod, even if it gets Ash or Purge or Kiltun RS or the Dracotail Flame or Fiesmith Desire or Asamina Sylvia, all of those cards, because they have the modern approach of how Konami wants the cards to work, especially the end board combo pieces, all of these cards negate the effect of the card. And as you can see, this is going to be very relevant because when you negate the effect of a card, the card still is considered as an activation, which means that if I activate Pot of Desires and it gets Ash or Push or blah blah, the effect is negated. However, Pot of Desires still was activated. Therefore, if I have a second Pot of Desires in my hand, or at any point of the turn I have another one, I can activate it again because I already did. And the card says you can only activate one, which is a huge difference again, because the results imply that the effect, the actual effect, is being actually applied. Which means that in this case, with Pot of Procrastination, if we activate it and we get Ash, Push, Killer Tune RS, Fiesmith Desire, Asamina Sylvia, Dracotail Flame, blah blah blah, if you can still use the other copy to punish your opponent for using that hand trap, which means that this spot is the first spot ever since Pot of Greed in the meta relevancy that can punish your opponent for avoiding the resolution of the first one, which means that you can be actually very rewarded in a lot of different scenarios when it comes to the game state currently in the TCG, thanks to the resolve restriction instead of the activate or use this card instead, right? So a lot of people, I'm making an emphasis in this because a lot of people are saying that this card won't be that good because if I go first, my opponent can negate it with their M board pieces, or I'm waiting for them to make their whole combo and then my procrastination will get Ash and then it's worth nothing, blah, blah, blah. Which I completely disagree, because if you make the actual investigation, you can see that a lot of the boss monsters or interruptions in the game now negate the effect. And that has been a tendency that Konami has been trying for a while now. You can go all the way back to the Therions, and you can see that Regulus negates the effect. So you get what I mean, right? Now let's go for the other, what the card actually does. So also draw cards equal to the number of cards your opponent controls. Then if you drew two or more, place the same number -1 from your hand on the bottom of the deck in any order. Now, this effect obviously is very dependent of how the game states works in Yu-Gi-Oh! And what your opponent is willing to leave left on the board in order to make you lose. And why is this so meta breaking? Because of because of the following card. Yes, that's right. MST is to blame for Pod of Procastination to be such a heavy meta impact card whenever it came out here in the TCG. Because if you watch my MST video that I'm going to leave in the comments, just to not repeat 20 minutes of Yu-Gi-Oh's history right now, Konami's approach, it has been changed for the last year, from the last years, because they had been developing combo decks that are not that relying in onboard of monsters, but trying to work with the interactions of the other zones, like the spell trap cards, field spells, continuous traps, etc. We can see that in Ryan Typhoon, we can see that in Yami, we can see that in Dracotel, we can see that in all the decks that we've been playing as a meta relevancy during the last years. And that has been even showcased at its maximum expression thanks to MST, because now they even have their own MST deck. But this will have consequences. Eventually, the focus on spell traps in the game, in the meta game, has derived in that, yes, a lot of cards that Konami wanted to make them less good are less good now, like Triple Tactical Talents, for example, or even Crossout Designator. However, this creates new problems because now the decks needs to deal with a spell trap focus environment or a mixed spell trap monster environment. However, this creates new possibilities of advantages. And that is why this card is so relevant, because now we are going to see that we will get punished for leaving a lot of space used in our zone, which is something that a lot of decks do. Just as a first example, see how the Yami Asamina Embord is, and just see literally the interactions and the development of the engine. You can see how it's now more spell trap focused, because the way to have a second Yami play is a spell. And in order to use this spell in your opponent's turn, you need to set it. Which means that if you're playing Yami, you most likely won't have the possibility to play around this card in order to get punished by it. And as I told you, Sylvia negates the effect. So if I use my Sylvia on the procrastination, and they have another one, most likely I'm going to lose, because they will still draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they most likely will have whatever they need in order to get rid of the rest. And even if you say that maybe the minion won't be here for a lot of different reasons, they will still draw in from four cards from these ones, which is still a Saryuha, which means that you most likely will lose if they have 10 different cards that they saw already to decide whichever they need in order to beat you, right? Now, let's go for another example. Okay, this will be the next example, the Elf Node deck. As you can see, again, we have spell and traps that we can afford to not have them there in order to develop the combo, or to have a really nice interaction plus follow-up consistently, right? So what's the issue here? That we have already 5 cards in this end board, and all of them matters in order for the end board of the Elf Node to be actually relevant and know, the shits. So here again, we are in a scenario when the only card that can actually, we have, yes, 2 cards that can interact with the Pod of Procrastination, and at the same time, sadly, both of them just negates again the effect. So if you use one of them or both of them, you are making that risk, right? It's almost impossible for your opponent to have 3 Pod of Procrastinations, but at the same time, if you are using these 2 to negate the 2 Pod of Procrastinations, then the other 4 cards that they may have can beat everything else, because you don't have spell trap negations anymore, right? So it's still kind of a risk to make that decision, because you don't know how many of the procrastinations they may have. So let's go for another example. Okay, in this case, again, you can see the pattern. In order for the Dracotail to be actually good, you can afford to not leave cards on the field. You need to set the Dracotail traps, you need to set the Fallen and the Virtus, so you are going to still be in a position where the Pod of Procrastination can beat your ass, because now Pod of Procrastination can become a lightning and a droplet, and then your field does literally nothing. You can see my point, right? And here you will be drawing 5, you will be drawing 6 cards, right? 6 cards and returning 5. So it's almost impossible to win if you allow the pot of procrastinations to resolve in this scenario. And from all the interruptions that you may have here, the only one that actually interact with the pot will be Draconic Flame, because it's the only one that can actually negate the spell. The problem, again, as you can see, negate its effects, which means that, again, if you put yourself in a scenario when the flame decides to negate the procrastination and they have another one, first you still have 4 cards on the field. So your opponent, yes, won't draw 6, they will just draw 5. Oh my god, what a difference, right? You're getting your ass kicked regardless, because now you don't even have a spell negation for whatever they may draw then. So you can see, I think that with just these 3 examples of meta relevance deck right now, you can see how actually Pot of Procrastination is an excellent card, an excellent answer to how Yu-Gi-Oh was becoming a more on-field approach with the importance that Konami has been giving to spell traps within the last few years. Again, you can watch the video, I make an historic review about it. So now the last thing that I would like to talk about the procrastination is how this will affect the development of Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the future. For example, just with the Yami deck, what I think is going to happen most of the time is that either all the old Yu-Gi-Oh decks will need to adapt in their approach of how they actually combo and play, or all these decks will be killed by the new pod, and the new decks in the future that will come out from whatever set is after Blazing Dominion will focus on needed only as minimum on the field as you need in order to have 5 interactions or something like that, right? For example, here with the Yami, instead of doing all that weird shit, just as an example, I'm not saying this is the optimal, but instead of doing an Asamina line with SP and Linkoriv or whatever the fuck, maybe now you will just leave a synchro and the quick spell, which is still kind of tough because in this case your opponent will draw 3, but at the same time you still have 2 lines. I'm not saying this is the best scenario, this is just for the purpose of giving you an example of how Yu-Gi-Oh is going to change. Because with this approach of procrastination, I'm pretty sure that the new disruptions in the future will be need like 2 cards on the field maximum, and will be focused on cards in the hand, cards in the graveyard, all that kind of fun shit. Because then you will punish your opponent for having pot of procrastination, because most of the time they will just draw 2 or maybe 3 at best, you know, which is a huge difference from drawing 5 or 6, you know. So if you enjoyed the video, you know, give a like, share it with your people so the channel can keep growing, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.